Hi, everybody. This is Don. It's great to see you on Zoom. It was also great to see you on Zoom this past Thursday. We had our first synchronous meeting since we've moved to a remote teaching model. I'm actually looking forward to next week as well, and we have our last synchronous meeting as we're almost done this semester. We've only got 2 weeks left. A lot of learning still to be done, a lot of things still to do in the classes that we're teaching. So I'm really excited to finish this out with you. The first lesson I would like to teach you today is that if you're ever deciding to cut your own hair, I guess someone else's as well, make sure you have the clipper guard on. Otherwise, you cut off a lot more than you mean to. So yeah, it's pandemic lessons that we're having here. Anyway, your thoughts this week and your reflections were on gaming, and particularly in using gaming in educational settings. And y'all had some wonderful questions. Y'all really got into this, a lot of sophisticated thinking going on here. And the first kind of theme that came across a lot of your questions is, will games in the classroom work for everyone? A lot of you had questions about individual differences among students, issues with disability. Issues with students who do and don't prefer games in the classrooms, issues with students who do and don't do well in traditional classroom settings. And these are really important issues. I think anytime we as educators are going to make a decision about the pedagogy we're going to use in our class, we have to think about the impacts on our students. Some of our students don't like active learning. Some of our students don't want to be involved in games. Some of our students don't want to cooperate with other students in the class. And one of the things that we've got to think about is what we're doing with those games. If we're bringing them to help our students learn, then they have to help our students learn. And that was actually one of the other questions that came up, and jumping around to different themes, is do games actually increase learning? If they do, that's great. If they don't, if it's just fun, if it's just edutainment, right, that combination of education and entertainment that really doesn't promote learning, then it's probably something that's not worth your time. And games do take a lot of time. Games take a lot of time to structure. They take a lot of time to set up. And a couple of you asked whether or not it's worth that. It all comes back to learning. If games are only going to be important for the learning of some of your students, you probably shouldn't use them. If games are going to help most of your students, okay, we're working toward a better compelling point for using games. But if they're not going to work, and it's just going to be killing class time that you could spend in other ways to promote your students' learning, then it's probably not something to lean into. If you're going to do games, they have to be accessible. They have to be things that your students with disabilities in your class or students with different learning accommodations and things like that are going to be able to be successful in. As far as the preference that students may have for games, this is a little bit harder issue, I think, to deal with, because our students have lots of preferences. Some of our students would prefer we lecture. Some of our students prefer we don't lecture. Some of our students like discussion. Some of our students hate discussion. And I think one of the things, and I made this point in some of the reflections that I read today, I think we've got to be the teacher in that class. We've got to make the decisions, but we've got to do so with our motivation being the promotion of our students' learning and the promotion of our students' success. As you've heard me say before, if we're not interested in promoting our students' learning and promoting our students' success, then we probably shouldn't be in the classroom. So if our games are set up to promote their learning and promote their success, then I think we can use them. If they're set up to kill time and make students have fun, but to actually avoid diving into the sophistication and nuance of their learning, then I don't think that they're great. So I do think we have to take individual differences like who will learn and will they learn into account when we're deciding whether or not to use games in our classes. Because fun does not necessarily equal learning, as one of you very astutely pointed out. However, fun can aid learning if done correctly. Anything that gets students more engaged in the information is going to be good, as long as they're engaged in the information. One of the biggest issues that I've seen in seeing instructors actually implement games in their classes is the games are too easy and the games are disconnected from the content. If the rules of the game are more important to learn for the instructor, for the students, than the actual content in the class, then that might be an indicator to you that it's not a great game. If you're doing very, very easy questions, I've seen this happen in a lot of labs. A lot of labs will do a review for an exam coming up, for instance, and like a methods lab, and they might play Jeopardy, or they might play Wheel of Fortune or something like that. If all of those questions in that game are easy and the exam is not, then that game is not a great use of class time to prepare that student to succeed on the exam. So I think what you're trying to get your students to ultimately do has to drive the design of the game. If you're preparing your students to use information in sophisticated ways, then the game should have them use that information in sophisticated ways as well. This is my opinion. But otherwise, I don't see the point of the game. And the game should have a point. The game should have an objective. A couple of you asked if games are worth the time, and if games are worth the time you build into them. I really think it depends on what the outcome is, what the learning outcome is. I think a greater learning outcome justifies more time, justifies more effort, more complexity. A lesser learning outcome does not. And I think we always need to be dealing with these balances. And a lot of you pointed out, and this is probably the last big theme that came out of the reflections this week, was how to get games into a system that already exists. So a number of you mentioned that there are standardized testing, for instance, that permeate our elementary and secondary education. They are something that we use prior to get into graduate school, law school, medical school, and standardized tests are a big part of what we do. So if games are going to take away from standardized test preparation, one of you had asked, are they worth it? Well, that's important. I do think that if we're preparing students for standardized tests, and I do not think that's the only thing we should be doing at any level, but if we are realistically doing that, then I think a game that is used appropriately to do that might be an interesting thing to consider. The bigger issue is, as some of you mentioned, if you're teaching a section of a course and it's not the only section of the course, or you have a co-instructor to that section of the course, how do you get that system to change to allow for a gaming approach to education? And I think that's a really important question. I think, as one of you said, the change would have to be gradual. What I think we need to be doing is focusing on the learning of our students, not the grading of our students. I think we have to be focused on what we're doing in our classes beyond just trying to make it look rigorous. If a class is rigorous because it's important to learn complicated information and nuanced information, to have students demonstrate that for professional preparation or something along those lines, then absolutely. But if you're just being hard to be a jerk, that's not great. And I think that games are a wonderful way to help students learn if used correctly and if used to promote students' learning and to promote their success. I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record this morning, being a little repetitive, because I think it's really important to do that. Games are not time killers just to have fun and to avoid the other content. I've seen classes that use a lot of games where the games are seen as the break from the learning. That's not true. The game should be promoting the learning. It should be the culmination and the demonstration of learning. And I think that's really important. However, games are not the only way that we can teach and learn. One of you had pointed out, I'm actually going to read the quote that the person had a negative reaction to. And I think the quote was meant to be inflammatory. As I noted to the student, the quote was, a teacher without an expertise in game design will one day be considered unfit for the classroom. This is a quote made by Tracy Fullerton. I think the quote was made to be inflammatory. I think the quote was made to get us a little bit agitated and to inspire us to consider using gaming in our classes. I don't think that games are absolutely essential to learning, but I think, like many other things, they are a tool that can help us achieve our objectives. If you see this as a tool that you can employ well, that you can use to promote your students' learning without becoming too much of a time sink, then absolutely you should use them. And I think there are lots of ways to use simple games to do this. I don't think you have to do something, quite as extensive as people have done, like the SMARC example you saw in that, which is a wonderful example of creating up, a fictitious economy in a class and to earn those currencies and to get real amazing things in exchange for spending those currencies. But if that's not going to fit your learning in your class, then don't do it. And this is something that we've told you all throughout the semester. If we or anyone else makes a recommendation that is going to work for you, then by all means, use that in your classes to promote your students' learning and success. If it's not going to work for you, if it's not going to work for your pedagogy, for your personality, for your department, the course that you're teaching, the particular content, the skills that you want students to develop, then don't do it. You have the power and the permission, not that you need it, but you have the power and the permission to turn down and avoid any of the recommendations that we make. However, I think games are fun, and I think games can be used well. I don't think I necessarily use them all the time in my classes, but I like, as a couple of you pointed out, the emphasis on collaboration that allows for there, the emphasis on collective learning, and the emphasis for earning points rather than losing points, right? For accumulating toward a goal rather than have some decrements along the way. And obviously, this is something that you've seen in my class. I love to have opportunities to earn points and opportunities to learn. And I think games fit well into that opportunity way of thinking. So those are my thoughts this week on gaming. And I'm looking forward to seeing reflections this week coming up. Again, it was great to see you in Zoom last week. It's great to see you today. It's going to be great to see you next week as well. In the meantime, if you need to reach out, if you need to chat, you need to talk, please do that. Otherwise, I am really looking forward to the continued demonstrations of your learning as we continue this semester. So see you next time. I hope all is well.